Welcome to another episode of Jews in the World. I'm Phyllis Zempler Miller, and I have as my guest today Craig Weiner, who has done a really amazing thing with his wife Barbara. And he's going to tell his origin story of his first Holocaust museum in Florida and now his second one that's upcoming. So, Craig, take it away with your origin story of why you did this.
Well, actually, Phyllis, we had very little Holocaust background in our family. But what brought us to do this work was after a trip to Eastern Europe, when we were in Buchenwald, and we saw students from all over the world, many countries, but we didn't see any American kids that day.
When was this?
This was in 2011.
Okay, keep going.
And at that time, I recognize, of course, Buchenwald gets over 1 million visitors a year, certainly many Americans. But we also came to the conclusion that it's very hard to have all of the American kids come to Florida. So, come to Buchenwald. So instead, let's see if we can bring that experience to Florida, which is what we did. First program that we ever did actually was bringing a guide from the Buchenwald concentration camp memorial to Florida to teach in schools. Actually taught in 100 schools from Coral Gables, Florida, up to Orlando. We had him here for 5 months. All the media covered it. It was a big deal. Something like that's never been done before. And then we decided that we have to take.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Absolutely.
Because I always want to encourage others to do it. So I understand how you brought him over, but how did you get the schools to say yes to you?
Now that's a terrific question, because some schools said no. And when they said no, I didn't just accept that as an answer. Instead, I went to the superintendent of the school system, and I made a point of saying to educators as well as to the superintendent, here's an opportunity to have a real experiential program for your students, where we have a guide that actually works at a concentration camp memorial, who can come and educate your students and answer questions from your students. Are you really going to say no to that? And at that point, that's when the schools, of course, became more receptive. However, I will say that some of the school systems were very receptive. I only had really that problem with 1 or 2 school systems, but overall, they were really very receptive to that.
And were they assemblies or by grade?
No. He went right into the classrooms and sat on the floor with these kids, or sat on their desks next to them. He brought PowerPoint presentation. Wow. And really did a lot of one-on-one discussion in classrooms.
What grade? What age level?
If I remember correctly, it was grades 8 and 9.
Okay. I just thank you for sharing the details, because for people who want to replicate it, I think it's important. Okay, now continue your origin story.
Well, by the way, it can be replicated. What you have to do is contact the foundations that run the various concentration camp museums and memorials in Germany or in Poland, and they will be happy to do an educational interchange. It just takes a lot of funding, because there's a lot of cost involved to do a program like that. So then after that was completed, what I did next was we went to a university that is here in the middle of Fort Lauderdale called Nova Southeastern University. And we asked them if they would help us conduct a statewide Holocaust reflection contest, which basically reaches 3,000 schools in the state of Florida, middle and high schools. See, a university can do the logistics, but they're not going to do the funding. So you have to provide the funding, which we did. And that contest has now been permanently endowed, which means that when we're all gone from this earth, the contest is still going to be going throughout the state of Florida, the Holocaust reflection contest.
Okay, I would love for you to describe the contest in more detail, exactly what it entails.
Sure. The contest has 3 basic elements. One of them is for film, one is for essays and poems, and one is for artwork. And the way it works is as follows. You have to make sure to get teacher participation. How do you do that? You do
Yes,
that by having awards for the teachers as well, not just for the students.
this is very
So
valuable. Go
yeah,
ahead.
so what we do is the following. We have basically six categories: the film, artwork, and essays divided between middle school and high school, cause six categories. Each first place winner gets $1,000 check, even the kids in grade 6. Each second place winner gets 250. The teachers get 500. There's many awards that are given. In addition,
Wait, wait,
because
let me look how to clarify. The teacher of the winning student.
correct, the teacher
And
of the winning student will get a check for $500. The teacher of the second place student will get a $250 check. And in fact, even teachers who have no winners, if they have submitted 10 entries or more, they get a gift card, either
that's,
to, to a local supermarket or to Amazon or something like that.
and
So,
wait, I just want everyone to listen to this because I'm involved in a grassroots project here in Beverly Hills, California. And it never would have occurred to us because we want to emulate your contest to reward the teachers. That is so brilliant to get the teachers. So I'm
and
just restating it to make sure everyone heard what you said.
yeah, and keep in mind that they don't have to have a winner. If they just enter 10 entries or more, which doesn't hurt them one bit, they're all getting a gift card for $25 just to do that. So we have a lot of teacher participation. And each year, when we have the awards weekend, which we just had actually last weekend, we make it a 2-day event. The first day, the teachers, their students, and their families are all invited to the museum. They have a private tour of the museum. Then
And
they
wait,
have
wait, now we're
dinner.
talking the winning students or,
Winning students and teachers
okay,
and families of
okay,
the winners.
okay, go ahead.
So then we bring them to the university and they will have a private tour, as I said, of the museum. Then they have dinner in the faculty club of the university as a private dinner with Holocaust survivors. And of course, when the day unfortunately comes that we can't have survivors, then we'll have second generation. And then the next morning, which would now be Sunday morning, we have the awards ceremony. And at the ceremony, we have an MC from one of the local NBC TV stations in Fort Lauderdale. And then we also invite the consulates from Germany, Israel, Canada. We invite various consulates to come and be represented. And every single year, the German consulate comes and the Israel consulate will come. And they normally send a high-ranking official and they will congratulate, speak to the students and teachers. The president or CEO of the university will also attend. We try to get someone from the governor's office if possible. And it basically is really a wonderful, wonderful ceremony. The parents and the students and the teachers, if you saw the notes that we get, they're absolutely thrilled with everything. So it's really a wonderful contest. We've now finished 10 years. We're going into our 11th year with this contest. And as I say, it's been permanently funded, so it'll go on forever.
So
Then, yeah,
what
go
was
ahead.
your next step that you did?
Okay. So then, about 2.5 years later, we realized that we'd like to take this further and be able to provide one-on-one experiences for as many school students as we can. So we asked the university if we could have space within the university library, which is the focal point of any university. And there happened to be some space available. And we, I guess for lack of a better word, we purchased that space because universities aren't going to give you space for free. So you have to make sizable donations to have that space, which we did. And that has also been funded in perpetuity. The reason I keep saying that, Phyllis, is because we had an experience when we moved to the United States from Canada in the 1970s. We found some synagogues going bankrupt and actually closing their doors. I had never, ever seen that before in Canada, never. it was just so strange to us to see that a synagogue could close for lack of funds. So when we decided to open these museums or do these contests, the only way we were going to do it is if it was in perpetuity. So there had to be enough funds put up to know that for sure it can never ever close for lack of money. So we opened this museum in 2016 on the campus of Nova Southeastern University. And it's really the only, I guess, true Holocaust museum right now in this immediate area. We exhibit over 250 original artifacts. Everything that we exhibit is original. In fact, we actually exhibit more artifacts than a lot of the very large museums do. We're not really into the concept of preserving. We're more into the concept of exhibiting. We want the students to see it, touch it, feel it. Now, yes, we don't let them touch these things or feel these things, but when they're very close up to these things and they understand, we have QR codes on every single exhibit case, so they can use their phones and they can hear someone explaining exactly what they're looking at. You're going to see students pointing at these things and talking to each other. And the things that we have are very demonstrative. They're things that, will be a little bit shocking sometimes to look at, and educational. We have things, for example, even from, I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but the old Bayer aspirin tin cans from IG Farben, which we have. And we have truncheons that were used. We have armbands that were used. We have SS armbands. We have an original cup from the Schindler factory on exhibit. As far as I know, there's the only ones I know of are the one that we have and the one that Yad Vashem has. I'm not sure whether Washington has one or not, but the artifacts we have on exhibit are highly rare and unusual. For example, like the brief action postcard, which I'm sure many of your viewers would be aware of. So we have this museum, we have students coming, schools coming every single week during the school year. We're booked now into the next school year already. We have very few dates left for 24-25. The teachers all come back every year. What's interesting about what we do, I hope I'm not going on too long. I don't want to be boring.
No, but I do want to ask you, as you know, one of my questions is going to be, I'm going to ask you about admission.
Sorry?
Whether you charge admission for the students.
No, we will never charge admission. It's zero for any.
Craig knows how this conversation started because of something we won't go into, that I was upset about a Holocaust museum charging admission for each student.
No. We would never even think of charging admission. It's not even in our thought process. But when the schools come, what's interesting to know is it's not like a visit to a typical museum. See, typically a yellow school bus pulls up, they go in, they look around at a museum, then they're back on the bus an hour later, they go back to school. In our case, we won't take schools unless they stay with us the entire day. And now the reason for that is
I didn't know that ahead of time. I hope everyone's paying really good attention. Go ahead.
Yeah, the reason for that, Phyllis, is we want the students to not just mingle around the museum and then get back on the bus. When they're in the museum with us, first they have a 1.5-hour session explaining the Holocaust with a PowerPoint presentation from World War I through to liberation, and how things happened, why things happened.
Wait. You said World War I, so you're including the interwar period. What, in other words?
Exactly.
Okay, let's just make this clear, because recently in my research, I realized how important this is to discuss with children. So we're talking about World War I ends in 1918. And then
Correct.
there's
that's when we start.
Okay, so this is really different than what a lot of people do.
I know, and I'll tell you why we do that.
Okay.
But I'll tell you why in a moment, though. I want to just tell you what.
Yeah, but I want to make sure people heard one and not to go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So what happens is that they have that session, then they have time to look around in the museum, and then we have classrooms. We have 5 classrooms in our building, And the next thing that happens is they're going to go into a classroom and learn about various topics. Let's say non-Jewish resistance. We also have a program on Jewish resistance. And then we have
Wait. Do they get to do they have lunch? Do you feed them and do they get to choose or do they
lunch comes
rotate?
after. Yeah, lunch comes after program number 2.
And do
So
they rotate through the 5 rooms or do they choose?
they rotate through 3 rooms. We have 5 rooms available to us. So what happens is session number 1 will be a tour of the museum and discussion about the Holocaust. And when we talk about the Holocaust, the most we spend time talking on is the word why. Not only who or what and when, but the word why things happened. How did they happen? What was the reason for people turning this way? Then they go into session number 2. Session number 2 will be, let's say for this conversation, will be a program about the White Rose. And in that session also, we do Dimensions and Testimony, which is the interviewing of a Holocaust survivor electronically. After that, they have lunch on the university campus. And the kids love that because you must remember, these are middle and high school kids. They're not in college. So they all go into the university center. There's going to be loud music playing and kids all over the place. And it gives them the feeling of, gee, this is what university's like. I want to do this one day.
I love
So
that. I
it's
love
also
that.
an inspirational day for these kids, not only an educational day. Then after lunch, they'll go into a classroom and have a session either with a Holocaust survivor, or if a Holocaust survivor is not available, we do a session on Jewish resistance. For example, the partisans. And that's a PowerPoint presentation, and we have clips from different films that we play, etc. And there are 4 of us that are teaching, that are doing this work. So that explains pretty well what the typical day would be like. And then at 2 o'clock, they get back on the school bus. They head back to catch their buses to go home. It's a full day. Otherwise, we won't take the schools.
I can't tell you how important that is because when I took a group, I won't go through the whole reason, in January of 2023 from my hometown of Elgin, Illinois, all non-Jewish kids, I co-organized and to the Holocaust Museum in Skokie, we got back the feedback that our students were much more attentive. But this was the regular tour, just that part, than the other students. And the reason is we had done all this preliminary work before, not at the museum, whereas the other group just, came on the school bus for an hour and came back. So
Yeah,
I'm so impressed with the fact that you won't take them unless they come for an hour. Excuse me, for the
for
whole
a full
day.
day. And I think that's really important. The other thing I can tell you is the way we teach or the way we conduct our programs is very different than most other people do. This is going to sound maybe silly to you, but it's just the way we do this. We explain to the students, I mean, the first question we always ask them is, why do we even teach this subject? What's the reason to teach it? And every kid sticks up their hand and says, so it'll never happen again. But the truth is, it does happen again. It's continued to happen since the Holocaust. So is that really the answer? I think the answer is that we can, as individuals, learn from what happened in the Holocaust, learn what happens from hate, from prejudice, from anti-Semitism, from racism, from bigotry, learn from that. And then it can make us into better people, more compassionate people, more empathetic people. As I explain to the schools superintendents all the time, and they always agree with me, is, it's wonderful that the kids go to school and learn science and reading and writing and math, etc. But don't we want them to leave school one day as good people? Isn't that important too? And that to me is what Holocaust education is really about. It's not about making it that it'll never happen again. All these kids that are sitting at their desks, there's not a single thing that they can do to make sure that it never happens again in Rwanda, for example. Not a single thing they can do. The realistic answer is so that we can learn as individuals to be better people. For example, give you another example. A few weeks ago at a school here called Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, which is where they had that horrible shooting a few years
Yes.
ago, So there was a kid that was beaten up in the parking lot by five other kids, five against one. That little boy ended up in the hospital with a fractured skull.
What age, what grade are we talking about?
This was high school, high school. And I explained to the students this. You see, I'm not that, I'm upset with those five kids that beat up this one kid, but I'm even more upset at the 50 kids standing in a circle videoing it and doing nothing. Isn't that what happened in the Holocaust? So that to me these are the lessons that we want to learn from this. So when I go over the history starting after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, I don't just I tell them right away, let's not focus on what year, because if something happened in 38 or 39, what is the difference? If the guy's name was Hitler or Joe Blow, what is the difference? It happened. So why did it happen? How could it have been prevented? What could the world have done? These are the things that I think are important to discuss. Unfortunately, I find that, I guess for exam purposes, the schools focus an awful lot on memorizing the date and the month and who it was and what they did and how they got into power, talking about fascism and pluralism, etc. All that's wonderful. But I think as human beings, the most important thing for us to learn is not the dates and the names and the places. It's why. Why did these things happen? How could they have been prevented? What did people in the world do? Why did people turn the way they did? Let's talk about the Depression and how those families were suffering. Let's talk about the hyperinflation in 1923 in Germany. Talk about these things. Try to understand, why would Joseph Goebbels be able to speak on a platform and have 1 million people out there listening? Why would they all go? And on top of that, in their suits and ties. So there's so many things that I think are important to analyze with this education.
I need to ask you a question. Where do you get your philosophy from? Are you a historian? Are you, you know, where did you get and how did you know how important it is to teach the interwar period?
Well, I'll be straight up with you. I'm not a historian. I only have a bachelor degree in university. I don't have a master's or a PhD or anything like that. I was simply in the shopping center development business. And we decided after that trip to Buchenwald that we were now going to give back to America. And how are we going to do that? Through Holocaust education. I think that a lot of this is simply common sense. You have to ask yourself, why were people the way they were? Why was it so right for someone like a Hitler and Joseph Goebbels to get up and speak and everybody would come listening so attentively? Why? If they went out if you got a call today in California that somebody was going to go out on the street and make a big speech, you wouldn't even go. However, these guys drew 1 million people. How did they do that? Well, the reason is the people were suffering. The people were looking for a way to get better. Got to remember, they had the Depression in 1929. People were out of jobs. People had no food. When you're hungry in your stomach and you can't provide for your children, you're going to look to anybody that can make things better for you. And this was, of course, all they did was use a bunch of nonsense and propaganda, but they got people to go along with them. How come from the beer hall putsch in 1923, he had only a couple of thousand followers, and all of a sudden, only a few years later, he's got over 1 million followers. So I think that period before the Holocaust is really critical to discuss.
I do too. And having lived in Germany a long time ago, my husband and I were stationed with the US Army in Munich from September 70 to May 72. There are cultural differences between countries. And we found, this is just our experience, that the Germans were very I don't know how the word is, like, where an American would not knock someone, I'm talking about a real incident, someone down on the ice rink with, we're very polite. The Germans, where we lived, were if they were told to line up, they lined up. But otherwise, they were very, I don't know if the word is unruly, but there's just something about they liked being told what to do. And from my reading, and I am not an historian either, I think that had a lot to do with the interwar period. The chaos made them more ready to follow a
Absolutely.
tyrannical ruler, made them
Yeah,
feel safe.
absolutely. That's what I feel. And again, I think a lot of this is really common sense. You have to ask yourself, why were people that way? You know, not just accept the fact that, oh, all of a sudden these people became murderers or whatever they did, or, you know, or why they ignored the fact that their neighbors are now being killed. Why is it? Why did these things happen? That's
But
the
there,
important part to learn.
but there's something else that I think that I only recently learned actually from a novel by Leon, I can't even pronounce his name, famous Jewish novelist who got out of Dodge in time, that when Hitler took power, the school books were totally changed. Just the way in Gaza, I'm not talking politics, but the school books teach them to hate Jews. And I was astounded. I'd never thought about, uh, the philosophy, everyone says the country of Goethe, et cetera, et cetera. Well, those books were no longer studied, according to the reading I've now done. These textbooks were totally changed to promote this following of a dictatorial leader. And we have to look in the United States, and this is why Holocaust education is so important, and how it's because of exactly the purpose of civic society, which is what something I've started to use the expression civic society, and yet I don't think it's being taught enough.
Well, the textbooks were certainly changed. In fact, especially at the youngest grades. We have a number of the original reader books that kids would learn how to read. And you
Really?
could open up the page like this, and on one page, you'll see them teaching the letter O, for example. And on the page exactly opposite, you'd see kids raising a swastika flag, yelling, "See Kyle," you know, on the page right next to it. So we have a number of these books. They're very hard to find, but they're critical. I mean, it's just another point of how everyone was at young ages were indoctrinated to be future Nazis. I mean, think about the Hitler Youth. You know,
Yes.
what better example could there be than that? So there was indoctrination and propaganda at all levels. We actually have some teacups that people would have drunk tea from in the afternoon. And on the teacups, there's women and children, and they're playing with swastika flags right on the teacups. I mean, it was on everything. It was that every single thing was controlled and done for propaganda purposes, no matter what.
So the thing that we in America and elsewhere have to do is teach from a very young age to have critical thinking skills and to not accept the swastikas in a teacup is it's just an example. But and I feel that that's what you're doing with your day-long program. You're teaching kids to think.
That's exactly what we're doing, because we also will relate it to social media. You know, the difference between propaganda during the war and propaganda now is just that now it goes at infinitely faster speeds. Otherwise, a lot of it is the same propaganda. You have to get the kids to realize, after you teach them about the propaganda and show them so many examples, you have to ask them, isn't this similar to your social media, whether it's TikTok or any other website? When you look on social media, you have to ask yourself two questions. Question number one, if I do what's being proposed, is that going to be really good for me? And question two is, if I do what's being proposed, how can I maybe get hurt from doing this? How can it harm me? Then make your decision. You have to think about these things first. Does it make sense to you to do these things? And, you know, that's how you have to treat propaganda. And that's what we do teach the students, exactly that. Don't just accept what you see on social media. Think about it. How can it hurt you? Don't only think of the good side. Maybe there's a downside to it as well. So yes, these are very important things. Now, what we're doing now is we've recently made an agreement with Florida Atlantic University, which is a state of Florida university with 30,000 students, but that one's located in Palm Beach County. See, we're in Broward County now, which is the Fort Lauderdale area. Palm Beach County would be Boca Raton and Del Rey and Palm Beach, for example. And abutting that county is what's called Martin County and St. Lucie County. So by building a Holocaust museum on the campus of Florida Atlantic University, that will make it feasible for students in all three of those counties to be coming with their school buses,
Let's
because it would have been
clarify.
too
He's
far
talking,
otherwise.
let's clarify. He's going to build a second museum.
Yes, and this museum is going to be in a brand new building that is being built. They're breaking ground this summer on the university campus. And it will be a building that is specifically for Holocaust and Judaic studies. So in that building, they had asked us if we would consider building a Holocaust museum to anchor the building. And, you know, you can tell from the way I speak about this subject, there was no way we were going to say no. So we agreed to do it. That second museum has also been funded in perpetuity, meaning that it'll be there forever. And we're now in the process of searching for artifacts and acquiring artifacts. And thankfully, I have connections now pretty well all over the world to find things. We won't display anything that's not 100% authentic. And it's just very difficult and very costly to find these things. But it's important for education, and that's why we're doing it.
I just want to add, I'm very impressed, authentic, because when I was with these students from Elgin, Illinois, and one of them asked the docent, are all these things real? And she said, yes, everything in the cases. That hit them, that they were real and not replicas. It just really made a difference.
Well, it's interesting. Some of your viewers may not be aware that there are museums that exhibit replicas. And where do they get them? For example, when you make a film like Schindler's List, and you have these hundreds of fake or, you know, reproduced uniforms, they don't normally just throw them in the garbage. Perhaps they give some of them to museums to show. Getting original things is extremely, extremely difficult, especially things like prisoner uniforms, because you have to remember that these uniforms were all full of lice. They were put into the forest and burned. So finding an original prisoner uniform is a very difficult thing. And every museum in the world pretty well is all out there trying to locate the same resources, get the same items. But we've already got some really amazing things that will be exhibited in this museum. So we are very anxiously waiting for it to be completed. It's going to be a beautiful museum. We're going to have a separate studio for Dimensions and Testimony in the building. It's also
Well, you
going
want to
to,
explain what that means in this context?
yeah, Dimensions and Testimony is from the USC Shoah Foundation, where they have different Holocaust survivors who have been filmed and taped for several days. They answer thousands of questions, and now the visitor can go in and actually talk to them and ask them pretty well anything you want. I've asked questions that I would never even have thought of asking. But the typical questions like, you know, do you believe in God, or how were you liberated, or tell us about your family, things like that. All of those answers are very clear and very well done. In fact, you mentioned that you're from Illinois originally. So you know that the museum in Illinois, the president was Fritzi Fritzshall, and she's actually one of our survivors that we have in our system. So there will be a separate studio for the students and general public to use that as well. Also going to be a 150-seat theater, plus an exhibit hall, classrooms. It's really going to be a remarkable facility.
And you told me it's going to be open for the school year of 2025,
Next year.
2026?
25, 26, yes. It'll take a year to get the building built, and they're starting construction this summer. They've already started, I believe, with the underground lines to utilities to come to the building.
So in the description of this interview, we'll have a link to your current museum, and if there's another link you want to share so that people, if they're visiting Florida like near
Yeah,
Disneyland. I mean,
not Disney. We're in South Florida.
but if they're visiting Fort Lauderdale,
Yes,
they can come as individuals, correct, to the museum.
they can come 7 days a week. By the way, we're open.
And how
We're
does
open.
that work?
Think of it as a public library.
Okay.
So you can go to a library 7 days a week until maybe 9 o'clock at night, something like that. So on the second floor of the library, where they have the main reference desk, that's where the Holocaust Museum is. And in that museum, there will be QR codes on all of the exhibit cases. People can just use their cell phone and hear what they're looking at. And if they don't want to do that, there are little name tags identifying every one of the objects as well.
Now,
And
is there admission for that?
no, no, there's no admission ever. No, that's very important to us. We want to encourage people to come, not to encourage people not to come. So we want it
Exactly.
with no admission.
You know that I'm very much in favor of this position. That's why I keep emphasizing it. But I also wanted to emphasize that people could come on their own if they're in the area.
No problem at all. Absolutely no problem. They can come anytime.
So as we come to a time to close this interview, what are the things, is there anything that you really wanted to say that I've missed asking you or that we haven't had a chance to discuss?
I think the only thing that I would keep emphasizing is how important Holocaust education is to combat hate. You know, you can't combat hate by just going in the classroom and saying, don't hate anybody anymore. That doesn't work. What you have to do is see and feel and be emotionally impacted by what hate does. That's so important. You know, when the kids are leaving and they start going on their school bus, and some of these kids will hug us and thank us for that experience, or write us notes saying, I never realized, you know, I have to change the way I personally think. And that's what you have to do. And I'll also tell you one other thing. If for any of your viewers, I would really encourage them to support Holocaust education. You know, there are many people, you'd say to them, well, do you support Holocaust education? Well, it's not really a good time for me right now. You know, it's not convenient. So I say to them, well, but tomorrow there's a golf tournament and it's $400 a person. Oh, I'm in, no problem. You know, so we have to make our priorities. We can't simply say, gee, anti-Semitism is so terrible and it's growing in our country. Okay, well, what are you doing about it? Well, I don't know. Well, what they need to do is they need to support Holocaust education. The museums, the schools, make sure they have as much funding as possible so they can do these programs with kids, with classrooms. To me, that's extremely important. You know, it's we all hate the idea of the anti-Semitism that's growing so exponentially again in this country and around the world. But what are we doing about it? You know, I think that's the greatest lesson that any of us can learn from all of this, from this whole conversation. It's up to all of us to do something, not just complain about anti-Semitism or racism or bigotry. Do something. Support Holocaust education. That's my view. That would be my message.
Well, I absolutely agree with it. That's why 2.5 years ago, I started a different podcast because I woke up one morning and said, I can't keep saying how terrible anti-Semitism. I was already doing Holocaust education, in fairness. But I said, I can't not do anything about anti-Semitism. So you're called to action for all of us, even at, you know, individual levels. People can go and offer to come into they don't have to be historians. They don't have to have degrees to go into local schools and present a program. Just do what you can to teach about this, how hate starts and what it leads to. And Craig, I can't thank you and your wife enough for what you've done. I mean, it's amazing. I can't wait to share this
Thank
interview
you.
with my grassroots group that trying to not deal with positive experience in Beverly Hills. We're going to try and replicate some of the things you've done. And I hope that my listeners will listen really well to this podcast interview and replicate. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.